Welcome to This Explainer. Let's cut right to the chase. Today, we're unpacking the high-signal macroeconomic takeaways from China's recent National People's Congress. Now, if you're an executive leader or a business strategist keeping an eye on global markets, this is absolutely essential to understand. We're going to look right past the surface-level PR announcements and analyze these goals strictly from an economic and supply chain perspective. We want to know exactly what Beijing's new directives mean for the future of your business.
Here is our roadmap for today. We'll be hitting 5 key areas. 1. Lowered targets and economic headwinds. 2. The 2030 AI Master Plan. 3. The semiconductor self-reliance hurdle. 4. Underconsumption and export risks. And finally, 5. Geopolitics and internal unity.
All right, let's kick things off with part 1, lowered targets and economic headwinds. To really grasp China's forward-looking strategy, we have to start with the stark economic realism defining their situation right now. The Premier's work report actually reduced the official GDP target for 2026 from the previous 5% mark down to a range of 4.5 to 5%. Now, to the untrained eye, a 0.5% drop might just seem like a rounding error, right? But at the scale of the world's second-largest economy, no way. That is a massive shift in their economic posture. It's a clear admission from Beijing that the days of unchecked, explosive growth are hitting pause as they confront some very real, very heavy domestic realities.
You see, this lowered target exposes the structural macroeconomic headwinds China is currently facing. They aren't just dealing with a temporary cyclical dip here. They are staring down a broadly weakening economy, which is compounded by a shrinking demographic and emerging workforce shortages. And look, when your population ages and your workforce literally starts to shrink, your fundamental economic engine has to change. For global executives, the takeaway is that China can no longer rely on endless cheap labor to drive output. They are being forced into a massive strategic pivot, transitioning from a volume-based economy to a high-value, tech-driven one.
Which brings us right into part 2, the 2030 AI Master Plan.
That strategic pivot I just mentioned? Well, it leads to a breathtakingly ambitious goal outlined in their new 15th five-year plan. The absolute cornerstone of this mandate is to integrate artificial intelligence into 90% of China's entire economy by the year 2030. Just think about that for a second. We are talking about digitizing and automating nearly every sector, factory, and service across a global superpower in just a handful of years. This is their highly calculated answer to those workforce shortages we were just talking about.
And this isn't just your basic automation or routine software updates. This aggressive plan is incredibly broad. It covers everything from deploying industrial and humanoid robots right onto factory floors to comprehensive AI systems managing the modern workplace, all the way to bleeding-edge stuff like advanced quantum research and brain-computer interfaces. The explicit goal is crystal clear here. China intends to dominate the global tech and AI sectors by 2030, and they are aiming to position themselves as the definitive winner in the ongoing tech war against the United States.
But there's a catch, which we'll cover in part 3, the semiconductor self-reliance hurdle.
As any good supply chain strategist knows, a software vision is really only as strong as the underlying hardware, and for Beijing, that creates a monumental roadblock. On one hand, you have these incredibly ambitious software goals, rolling out AI and robotics across 90% of the economy, but that is colliding head-on with a glaring hardware vulnerability. Currently, China relies heavily on high-grade US-designed hardware and powerful AI chips to actually build and train these systems. Achieving self-reliance here is a massive hurdle because of the immense capital requirements and deep technological moats inherent in advanced chip manufacturing. They simply can't just spin up this hardware domestically overnight, and without it, executing that 2030 master plan is going to be incredibly tough.
It really all comes down to this single concept. Achieving this 2030 vision absolutely hinges on China being able to become self-reliant in semiconductors. Right now, that reliance on foreign hardware is the primary bottleneck dictating their entire global strategy. If they get cut off from high-end chips, that 90% integration goal stalls out. So if you are managing international supply chains or tech investments, monitoring China's domestic chip manufacturing capabilities is, without a doubt, your most important metric for the next 5 years.
Moving on to part 4, underconsumption and export risks.
Now, while this entire technological race is happening, it's playing out against the backdrop of a pretty staggering metric: $1 trillion. That was China's trade surplus last year alone. You see, Chinese consumers are currently plagued by underconsumption. The domestic market just isn't spending money. So the economy has been artificially buoyed by record-breaking exports. On paper, $1 trillion surplus sounds amazing, right? But from an economic risk standpoint, relying entirely on exports while your domestic consumption stalls out is actually a highly fragile position to be in.
And that heavy reliance is already starting to trigger some severe global blowback. We are currently seeing foreign nations threaten major tariffs to curb this export supremacy and protect their own local markets. Europe is a perfect example. They are watching their local markets, especially the automotive and manufacturing sectors, face total decimation from an influx of cheap Chinese goods. Because of this, European nations are strongly signaling that they might impose strict taxes on imports just to protect their domestic industries from this flood of exports.
So what's the bottom line here? China's leaders know they have to rebalance their economy away from exports and back toward domestic consumption. But until that actually happens, trading partners around the globe, like Australia and Europe, are watching this incredibly closely. If China just keeps leaning on these record-breaking export surpluses, we are almost definitely going to see retaliatory policy shifts, more tariffs, and genuine global economic instability as other countries step in to control China's market dominance.
Finally, let's wrap up with Part 5, Geopolitics and Internal Unity.
We absolutely cannot evaluate these massive economic targets in a vacuum. We have to look at what's happening internally. A major piece of legislation just passed through the Congress called the National Unity Law. This policy prioritizes Mandarin over local ethnic minority languages, specifically mandating it as the main language taught in schools and used on road signs in regions like Tibet, Uyghur, and Mongolian societies. The stated goal from the Chinese Communist Party is that this will increase national unity, brand pride, and party allegiance. On the flip side, human rights critics heavily scrutinize this move, viewing it as entrenching a long period of cultural repression for ethnic minorities across the country. It really is a striking look at the internal consolidation of culture and power happening right alongside their economic shifts.
Externally, things are just as complex. Throughout the Congress, there were these vague, yet pointed references to global instability and challenges to global hegemony, which is clearly a nod toward tensions with the U.S. Plus, you have the ongoing war in the Middle East, casting a massive shadow over international relations, influencing global trade routes and alliances. And in response to all this tension, we've actually seen a steady succession of Western leaders visiting Beijing recently, all actively trying to reset relations and figure out exactly where China's economic and political machine is heading next.
So, when we put all these pieces together, the lower GDP targets forcing a strategic pivot, that massive 90% AI integration goal, the severe hardware bottleneck in semiconductors, and this intricate geopolitical web, it leaves us with one incredibly vital question for the near future. With a historic summit looming just weeks away, how will the upcoming meeting between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping in Beijing alter the entire trajectory of this global tech war? Because the answers forged in that room are going to ripple through every single supply chain and global market we've talked about today. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and definitely keep your eyes on the hardware.